To order. Welcome to meeting number 12 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor English or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform us immediately and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings of this meeting. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can be used at any time if you wish to speak or alert the chair or the clerk. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from the health authorities as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on Thursday, November 25th, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when seated, must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizers in the room. Please refrain from coming to the room if you are symptomatic. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. For those participating virtually, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor English or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. When you're ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on February 1st, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of differential outcomes in immigration, refugees, and Citizenship Canada's decisions. It is my pleasure today to welcome Honourable Sean Fraser, Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship, for appearing before the committee. Thanks a lot, Minister, for appearing before the committee again today. He's also joined by the department officials. We are joined today by Caroline Xavier, Associate Deputy Minister, Pammy Gill, Director General, International Network, and Farah Boyce-Clare, Director, Anti-Racism Task Force. I would now like to welcome the Minister, and who will begin our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks, and then we will go into our round of questioning. Minister, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm joining you here from Newfoundland. It's great to be back to be making regular appearances before the committee. Permettez-moi de commencer en disant que
Allow me to start by saying that Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada has zero tolerance for racism, discrimination, or harassment of any kind. However, we do know that within the public service and as well as within our department, these problems do exist. If we want to be able to really change and make substantial change, we first have to recognize this reality. That is why we have created safe spaces and an inclusive and healthy workspace, which is a priority for myself, my deputy ministers, as well as for the whole department.
And act. Our diversity in Canada is a major strength, and we all benefit, in my opinion, when we reflect that diversity in our public service. This is true for all federal agencies, and especially for IRCC, given its mandate to welcome new Canadians. The department's committed to diversity and inclusion, not only regarding its employees, but in the work that we do as well, including the fair and non-discriminatory processing of applications that we receive from people of a wide variety of backgrounds. I'd like to outline a few of the actions that we're taking to address this ongoing commitment. The first major step towards this commitment was to create in 2020 our anti-racism task force. This task force guides the department's strategy to eliminate racism and applies an anti-racism lens to all of the work, policies, and programs that we're responsible for. Overall, IRCC has been actively reviewing its human resource systems so that Indigenous, Black, racialized peoples, and persons with disabilities are better represented across IRCC at every level. À cette fin, nous avons pris 2 engagements ministériels.
To achieve this objective, we have made 12 departmental commitments to make IRCC more equitable and diverse as a workplace, that the department be accountable for progress made and to make adjustments to the composition of the workforce by 2024. We have also made 6 commitments for service delivery based on anti-racism measures designed to analyze and evaluate the impact of prejudice in service delivery, especially through an examination of the services we offer to African clients. These commitments are important. It is only with measuring these parameters that we can affect change.
Deliver on our commitments, we put in place numerous initiatives and training programs that support decision makers across our various lines of business. Just a few examples. We've set up a service delivery anti-racism working group and that's mandated training to support decision makers' understanding of procedural fairness and impartiality in the decision-making process. The department oversees quality assurance program, quality assurance program has been expanded to conduct annual reviews of application refusals. We're mapping available race-related client data to identify possible bias, systemic racism, and other barriers. We're reviewing policies and programs to identify systemic racism or barriers in program and service delivery, and we modernize and adopt new technologies. We are also developing guidance and implementing measures to mitigate bias and unintended negative consequences. Je tiens à souligner que nous sommes attachés.
I would like to note that we are committed to the equitable application of immigration law. Thus, immigration applications received by IRCC are individually evaluated based on documents given by the client.
Steps to make real and lasting changes within the department to ensure that our actions support our commitments. We've established this 3-year anti-racism strategy, which includes in its plans mandatory bias training, mentoring, and sponsorship programs, anti-racist work and training objectives included in the performance agreements, leadership programs for underrepresented groups, trauma coaching sessions for Black employees and managers to recognize impacts of racism on mental health, employee trust circles, and racial impact assessment tools for policy development, and other initiatives to support workplace cultural change. We're also focused on targeted recruitment processes to help meet higher representation levels and are implementing anti-racism commitments in our leader performance agreements. To this end, IRCC is initiating a new 3-year hiring and retention strategy to address the diversity of our workforce. Nous préparons également une banque de gestion des talents où les
We are also preparing a talent management bank where employees can register so that they can be considered for positions within the IRCC. Thanks to these initiatives, we are starting to see encouraging changes with respect to equity in the workplace, especially in lower level positions. But we still need to make more progress at higher level positions so that we can have a workforce that is representative of the Canadian population.
So that racialized individuals can contribute to our department, especially as leaders, and can inspire others to pursue leadership roles. Madam Chair, is that the end of my time, or is that a signal there's a little bit of time left?
Oh, like it's 5 minutes are done.
Okay.
You can quickly wrap up in a few seconds.
Sentence. I would just say that it's not lost on me that there have been certain very serious issues that have pertained to IRCC. I'm not here to suggest they have not taken place, but to commit to improving them. I think it's important for our department. I think it's important for Canadians, and I'd be happy to take whatever questions the committee members may have.
Thank you, Minister. You'll get an opportunity to talk further in your round of questioning. We will now proceed to our first round of questioning, and we will start with Mr. Helen. Mr. Helen, you have 6 minutes. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, it's great to see you again in the committee. Thank you for coming. Minister, in a recent article, IRCC was quoted saying, quote, IRCC is committed and believes in creating a workplace free from racism, harassment, discrimination, and marginalization of any kind. Do you believe that this commitment is being met right now?
Thank you for the question. I think there are lots of examples where the spirit of that commitment have not been met. Frankly, I would be foolish to say otherwise. That said, when I speak to the leaders within the department, including some who are with us at this committee today, I don't doubt they're committed to effect that kind of systemic change that will reduce the racism that we see that have been reported on. So to your question, I believe the commitment is an honest one. I think we have work to do.
Now, in regards to the commitment and work that needs to be done, there seems to be no action really being taken. Since 2019, IRCC's Office of Conflict Resolution received about 50 cases of racism and discrimination. We know about the Polera report. According to your own officials, not a single person has been reprimanded or fired. Nothing has changed. We hear about all sorts of disgusting behavior still taking place towards racialized employees. Now, there's one thing to commit, but there's also one thing to take action on that. And according to just the numbers, there's no action being taken. What are you doing? What kind of plan do you have to address what's already in front of you?
Sure, and I think it's really important that we don't shy away from really difficult conversations. And the Polera report had some deeply, deeply troubling discoveries. One of the things that I would point out, though, is the origin of that Polera report came from a proactive decision within the department to do something in the wake of the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officers at a time when the world was talking about doing more to combat systemic racism. So the department decided they wanted to do something too. They discovered some pretty serious things that we need to address, and that was part of the justification for launching this
respectfully, Minister, definitely there's commitment, but like you said, the anti-racism task force has been struck since 2020. That's 2 years, and not a single person has been reprimanded, according to your own officials. Now, what kind of trust do you think, or do you think there's a breakdown of trust within IRCC employees when they don't see any action being taken? There's in the same recent report, there's a racialized employee who says that she reported racist attitudes towards immigration applicants from certain countries, including Cuba and Nigeria. And she is quoted saying that came from the top. How we were instructed to deal with people from certain countries. There was a lot of stereotyping going on, people from this country, people from that country. They're all liars, end quote. Now, it's one thing to say that you commit, but after 2 years of no reprimands, do you not appreciate the fact that employees at IRCC don't have any faith in any changes being taking place?
So I completely appreciate the perspective, and I'm not going to tell you that all problems have been solved since the task force has been implemented, but I don't think it's fair either to suggest that no action has been taken. Through the opportunities that we're creating to provide training for people to come across these kinds of horrible comments less frequently, to the extent we can continue to boost training opportunities, to have more members of the senior leadership team at IRCC come from communities that have historically been marginalized, whether it's the trauma coaching sessions that are being offered for employees. There's quite a few different aspects to this that I do think are making a difference, but I'm not here to tell you that all problems have been solved. So we have a lot of work to do, but I do think that there's been an honest and good faith attempt to start to address some of these very, very serious challenges.
Again, Minister, I'm speaking on behalf of the IRCC employees that are on some of these records. Obviously, they don't want to share their names, and people I've talked to themselves, there's just in the same article itself about the pressures on racialized employees of IRCC that are feeling like even when they go to the bathroom, they need to ask, and they get asked if they take too long of washroom breaks. They're asked to be performing at a higher level. Now, in the same article, another racialized employee has said that there are fewer career advancement opportunities within IRCC for people of color. He said he noticed a reluctance to promote employees of color within the department over the years. He said he went through a dozen of the applications before he got a promotion. So there's definitely a lot of problems, and they don't seem like they're coming to an end. Now, moving on, I asked you this question last time in regards to the Afghan and the Ukraine, and what people are saying. There seems to be a big difference in the processing that's going on and the priorities. Rightfully so, there's been about 10,000 Ukrainians that came here to Canada and on a priority basis within a month. but there's still many thousands in Afghans that are stuck there. Recently, there was through an OPQ, we found out that only about 2,385 Afghans have come here to Canada under the government's special refugee program. And that's very unacceptable. As we know, the Taliban has ramped up their brutal regime. They're not letting women and young girls go to school anymore. So those Afghans are still frustrated with your government and feeling that there's a huge bias against them. What do you have to say to that?
Madam Chair, I think you've signaled my time is out. I hope these conversations come back up because I have much to say about this issue.
I think we will come back. We will now have to move to Ms. Kayabaga. Ms. Kayabaga, you will have 6 minutes. You can please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister Fraser, for coming here again in our committee and addressing the many questions that we have. I also just want to highlight the fact that the reports that we're talking about today were released before you were a minister. So I know that there are some things that you're not able to be accounted for, but I do want to know what are your thoughts on when we talk about addressing systemic racism in an organization in a Canadian context? What are your thoughts on some of the ways that we can do that using the resources of the people that are already in our country and the representation that we need in order to address that systemic racism?
First of all, thank you, Ms. Kayabaga, for this question. And look, your comment was generous off the top to point out that the timing of some of these problems. And I adopt the view they may not necessarily be my fault, but they are my responsibility and frankly, my opportunity to address. To your question about how we can use folks who are here now to help address this problem, or I would even suggest within IRCC already, one of the things that I am struck by is when I come to Ottawa every week and I have conversations with people who have different life experiences than I have, who come from a different country of origin, who come up from a different ethnic or racial background, the conversation changes. And I talk about things differently with different people, and we have more informed discussions, and I would like to think make better decisions. I had a conversation at a newcomer center in Alberta just during a recent visit last week, and we were having a conversation, and I raised the fact that there was an incredible spirit of entrepreneurialism with some of the refugees who've come to my community. And one of the employees said to me, she stopped me in my tracks, and she said, it's great because there is a spirit of entrepreneurialism, but you may not realize, coming from your life experience, that that's driven by the fact that a lot of newcomers or people who come from her community weren't able to land jobs with traditional employment scenarios because they were being subjected to racism at the time. And to have my eyes open to something that is so glaringly obvious in retrospect demonstrates to me that if we bring different people from different backgrounds into the conversations, we're going to have healthier discussions and make better decisions. So to your question, a big thing that I think we can do is to adopt a training and promotion exercises within the department to ensure that the senior leadership and the middle management in a department is not homogenous. To have people who understand the life situations of the people who are applying to come to Canada from different countries, who come from different religious or cultural backgrounds, I think is one of the chief things that we can do. I don't want to eat up all of the time. I have much to say about this, but I'll leave it for your next question.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer, and that kind of flows into my next question, because in order to get to this place of addressing discrimination in IRCC and systemic racism, we have to fight for some policies. And I remember being part of those group of people who were asking for the UN Decade of People of African Descent to be something that we implement as a policy, and thankfully we did that. Would you agree that we should extend that in order to continue to address? Because this task force was set up in 2020. It does not give us enough time to be able to address the issues that are in IRCC. And before you answer that, I'll throw in another question with that. I had the opportunity to go to Dakar and talk to IRCC members in Dakar who are currently serving 16 to 26 other countries in the area. They're not able to be physically in those other countries that they serve. And I wonder how the impact of the decisions they're making that are not informed, do not understand the countries that they're serving, would have on discriminating or the high refusal rates that we've seen in African countries.
Look, thank you for this question. And one of the challenges that I have is that you do want to increase cultural awareness by having, to the extent possible, locally engaged staff who understand the intricacies of what a person may be dealing with who's applying to come to Canada from a given country. On the flip side of that coin, establishing a physical presence in every country that I would like to have that expertise could significantly hamper the ability of our department to process people efficiently and effectively, given our ambitious immigration levels targets. And trying to incorporate people who have that expertise into a more centralized system is a really challenging thing to do. I think we have a unique opportunity, and this is not informed by years of policy work in the department, but something I've been personally thinking on. I think we have an opportunity to use some learnings during the pandemic where we can actually be tapping into expertise that exists all over the world without necessarily putting up a new building in Dakar or elsewhere, that would allow us to understand those 16 or so other countries that are serviced from that location without necessarily compromising on productivity. But I'm not ready to sort of implement a new policy along these lines because we actually have to go and understand what the consequences of an approach like that might entail.
Thank you, Minister. Would you be open to receiving information or comments from IRCC workers who are in these places? Because I think they do have something to say. And I do wonder if there is a report, if there could be a report that we can hear from them on their thoughts on
Sorry
how
for
they can best
interrupting, Ms.
serve.
Kabaga. Your time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Dessep. Mr. Brunel Dessep, you can please begin. You will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the Minister for being available. It's quite an honor to have him here, and that's something that we do need to appreciate. I think that the Minister and myself, we have worked together for Ukrainian refugees and the humanitarian convoys or corridors, and I think this is very important. Julian Christian said, and he was a witness, he said that with respect to racism at the IRCC, we need to call things as they are, even if it's uncomfortable. End of quote. So everyone here at the committee is uncomfortable with racism, but we do need to be able to say the word. And so I'm wondering, is with the Minister, is there racism at the IRCC? Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm quite in agreement with the member. In reality,
are examples of racism, not just in one department, but across different levels of government. It's a sickness in our society that limits the productivity of human beings who want to fully participate in our communities. IRCC is not immune from that social phenomenon that hampers our success as a nation, and we have to do everything we can to eradicate racism, not just from our department, but across government and across our society.
Merci pour cette réponse, Monsieur.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Minister. With respect to artificial intelligence, are you comfortable with its use in your department, yes or no?
Que vous êtes conscient des risques que...
Are you aware of the risks that are there inherent in the use of AI?
If you'll indulge me, I promise to be short, but I want to give a 30-second answer, Monsieur Brunel Dessep, if that's okay. So yes, if we're operating in a 21st century context and trying to welcome more than 430,000 permanent residents, we need to use modern tools to make sure that we don't create a system that can't handle the capacity that our communities so desperately need. We have to build protections into the use of advanced analytics to ensure that we're not discriminating against one group or another. The system that we use tries to funnel cases that have no complexities to people who can easily do that. And we've seen with those cases that don't have complexities an 87% increase in efficiency, but it's really important that we don't compromise in a way that would allow the system to make decisions or something like that that could have a discriminatory impact. And it's essential that an IRCC officer still makes the final decision on all of these cases.
Okay, but if I were to tell you that 90% of the acceptance rates for McGill students and 25%, and for University of Quebec and Rimouski it's 40%, and Chicoutimi, we can see that since there is automation of the process, we're looking at these numbers. So are you comfortable with the fact that we now see more difference between the acceptance rates for foreign students among French universities compared to English ones?
Je pense que nous avons...
I think that we have a great opportunity here for Francophone arrivals and for international students that are Francophone. But I don't think that the problem is just the advanced analytics.
When I look at the applications in terms of where they come from for students to study at designated learning institutions that are francophone in nature, it's a big issue for me in Nova Scotia avec l'Université de Sainte-Anne, and in Quebec, of course, as well. But I wouldn't attribute the issue just to advanced analytics. I think it provides an opportunity for us to actually cure this differential, to bring more international students who make excellent permanent residents after they arrive.
Mais vous nous dites que ça fait partie du...
But you're saying that's part of the problem. It's not only that, but it is part of the problem. That's what you're saying. Minister Bennett, in November 2021, you said that personally you would look at the African discrimination with Francophones. So how are you doing with this study, this investigation?
So just for the sake of clarity, I have not been able to identify that advanced analytics is part of this particular problem. Some of the things that I struggle with when I look at the applications from certain Francophone speaking countries in certain parts of the world, year to year, they're in the rough ballpark of Anglophone speaking countries from the same part of the world. One of the challenges that we have when we look at the requirement for proof of income, for example, when we're dealing with a country whose economy is not as strong, the average household income is significantly less than Canada's, a lot of people are not admissible to Canada as a result of that particular policy. And when we're dealing with French-speaking nations in West Africa, obviously the population is disproportionately Black. And it's a challenge when you look at those differential outcomes. But in terms of the English-speaking versus French-speaking, the differential year to year is not as great as I thought it would be. But I still think there's a massive opportunity for us to make policy changes, including by introducing the student direct stream to some of these countries to boost the rate of people who come here and ensure they're set up for success when they arrive.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.
To Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you can please begin for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister and the officials for returning to the committee. Witnesses have noted that differential actions from IRCC, and they noted that emergency measures will vary depending on where they come from. For example, the special immigration measures for Ukrainians, they noted that it's much easier for them to come to Canada versus those in other regions also in need of getting to safety. And they all said that they support the special measures for Ukraine, but what they're concerned about is that it's not being applied elsewhere. All the witnesses agree that the government should extend those special immigration measures to other regions also experiencing conflict, such as Afghanistan, Yemen, Hong Kong, etc. Will the minister do as the witnesses suggested?
I need to learn to see what the impact of this approach is going to be first, but I would just explain that there is a reason we've designed a specific program in regards to the situation in Ukraine. And if I want to contrast it to Afghanistan, there's really two major differences. One is the ease with which Ukrainians have safe passage outside of Ukraine to the west and can find a pathway where they can be safely processed and go through our biometric screening process as well. Huge challenges on the ground, but compared to Afghanistan, we're dealing with specific people we've made a commitment to who are in a territory where the Taliban is not letting them leave the country and they cannot transit safely throughout or outside of Afghanistan. That the second component is that we do expect from our conversations with European counterparts, with the Ukrainian Canadian community, that we expect that there is a desire to return amongst the vast majority of those who are coming for a temporary period to Canada from Ukraine. With respect to Afghanistan, I wish the circumstances were the same. I don't have the same hope that it will be safe for the people that we're welcoming permanently as refugees to return home one day, despite their potential desire to do so. And that's allowed us to create different circumstances or different responses for the unique circumstances.
Thank you, Minister. But surely the Minister can, for example, ensure that there are biometric centers in neighboring countries, even though Afghans would have a tough time getting to the third country without any help from the Canadian government. Nonetheless, those measures should be in place to allow and to facilitate that. And I hope the government will undertake these measures, not just say, we'll watch and see how it goes, because time is of the essence and people cannot wait and lives hang in the balance. With respect to third countries, in fact, the minister noted that there are specific targets in Afghanistan that he's looking at. I know of one family where he was an interpreter there. He himself got here and he's working day and night to bring his family here. He is successful in bringing 15 of his family members, his mother, his father, and some of his siblings. However, of that 15, one brother has been left behind in Pakistan, even though his biometrics is been done and approved. All the screening's been done, but somehow he's been left out. Why is that?
First, on the issue of biometrics in third countries, we do have some capacity in different countries and have conversations with partners in the region. We may not have the same prevalence of visa application centers that we have in pre-existing in certain parts of Europe, but we are pursuing that specific strategy, and I appreciate your suggestion very much. I don't have the information for this one specific individual, and I wouldn't be at liberty to talk about an individual case because sometimes there are complexities on the given file. But if you like, I hate to see families separated, particularly when they've gone through such trauma. To the extent that there's this person is admissible to Canada and we can make some accommodation, then that's something that would be worth following up on.
I will certainly follow up with the minister, but I would also note, though, there are a number of other families in Pakistan who cannot make it to Canada for some strange reason. And so I would note that for the minister and for the officials to look into. Professor Christian, in our last committee, noted that Nigerian Student Express requires Nigerians to prove English language proficiency, even though English is their official language in Nigeria and is the official language for all formal studies. Yet foreign students from Nigeria is exempt from proof of language proficiency and foreign students from Nigeria is exempt from proof of language proficiency in all academic institutions, but not in IRCC. Why is that? Why the differential treatment?
Sorry, just the differential treatment for Nigerians applying to IRCC versus their learning institutions?
Well, IRCC requires Nigerians to provide language proficiency in English when they're applying for their student visa, even though English is their official language and is the official language of all of their formal studies. All academic institutions recognize that and do not require proof of language proficiency, but IRCC requires them specifically to provide language proficiency. Why would we do that? Why that differential treatment? Do you make other countries whose English is their official language provide language proficiency?
So, Madam Chair, I'll apologize because I took up some of the members' time. So if you'll allow me to offer a response despite the fact that time has expired. If this is an opportunity for us to streamline the process in a way that the vast majority of people don't run into a language barrier when they do apply, I'd be interested in doing that. And the Nigerian Students Express system has seen a significant increase in approvals overall. And if we can improve it further, then I'm interested. I want to be careful to ensure that we don't jeopardize, particularly for students whose mother tongue may not be English, don't jeopardize the important protections that come with someone satisfying the language requirements. So to the extent that we can work together to identify opportunities to further increase the acceptance rates of Nigerian students, I think it would be a very positive thing for Canada.
Thank you, Minister. Time is up. We will now proceed to our second round. We will start our second round with Mr. Janus. Mr. Janus, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. Minister, I wanted to, following some of the discussion about Afghanistan, just ask you about a specific situation. It was a situation that I wrote to you about last week, and it's one that's very important to people in my constituency. One of my constituents traveled to Afghanistan at obviously great personal risk to help a family that he was acquainted with leave the country, and subsequently this constituent of mine has raised the finances required to privately sponsor this family. They're in Pakistan now in a very tenuous situation. And this couple is both human rights defenders. The man is a human rights lawyer, and the woman is was a teacher at a girls' school. They were prepared to apply, and they were told not to submit their application because the navigation unit is not giving pre-approvals right now due to switching systems. Can you maybe speak to that technical issue, and then also advise if you'd be prepared to intervene to expedite this case? This is I think a very worthy case and a very serious situation, and these folks are in a very tenuous situation in Pakistan right now.
Thank you for the question, and I'll say before I answer that I have been impressed with your consistency in defending folks internationally for their work to defend human rights, and I do appreciate it very much. I'll have to look into, you'll forgive me, I'll have to look into the technical issue and provide you with an answer on the back end. I will go over your letter on the back end of this meeting and provide you with a response. I don't want to prejudge the nature of my intervention, despite the fact that it clearly sounds like a sympathetic case. I would like to apprise myself of all the details and give myself an opportunity to do that in a thoughtful way. But I'll use this intervention on your part as an opportunity to dig in deeply and to provide you with a proper response.
Thank you, Minister. I really appreciate that. I know that a week is a relatively short amount of time in terms of turning around correspondence, and I'm not always that efficient myself. But given the nature of the case and its urgency, I did want to highlight it, and thank you for committing to looking into it and following up on those issues. I found it interesting that in response to my colleague, Mr. Brunel Ducep's question about racism at IRCC, you referred to racism as a sickness. I would be more inclined to describe racism as a moral evil as opposed to a sickness. I suppose the difference is that one sort of implies that it's something that just happens, whereas another implies that there are specific people who are responsible for the things they do and should be held accountable for it. And I was thinking of that description just in the context of my colleague, Mr. Holland, pointing out that there have not been consequences for individuals who engage in racist behavior. So I'd like to know, I guess, if you would agree with my description of racism as a moral evil as opposed to a sickness. I mean, maybe it's both, but then also speak to this issue of whether you believe individuals who have engaged in racist behavior should be held accountable, should be reassigned or removed. What is appropriate in terms of identifying actors and consequences?
Sure, and look, I cannot disagree with your assessment that racism is a moral evil. I think that's a fair descriptor. I think it could also be a sickness. I think both things can be true, particularly in the sense that left unchecked, it has the potential to spread throughout communities and infect the minds of people who may be developing opinions about the world. And I think it's important that we across society work with people starting at a young age to provide education about equality rights. In terms of the second aspect to your question, of course, when somebody takes part in behavior that constitutes a moral evil, then I think that it's appropriate to seek some sort of consequence. I want to be careful though, because I think there's some opportunities to actually deal with unconscious bias in a way that's maybe different than somebody who's specifically aiming to do harm to another person on the basis of their
Minister. Sorry, I have 30 seconds left. I do want to say I agree with the distinction you're making between intentional and unconscious behavior, and I think that is reasonable. Another colleague had asked about why Ukraine is being treated in a different way from Afghanistan. She mentioned Hong Kong. You didn't respond to the Hong Kong piece of it. Could you speak to whether the kind of measures being used in Ukraine are being contemplated for Hong Kong, and why or why not?
Sure, and look, in a few seconds it will be challenging. Right now, the situation in Ukraine, based on the temporary nature of people wanting to leave and come back when it's safe to do so, and the ability to safely exit are two of the driving forces. To the extent that this proves to be easier, we may be able to repeat the kind of a response elsewhere in the world, but we will want to make sure that the facts mirror the situation in Ukraine before we take such an approach.
Thank you, Minister. We will now proceed to Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will have 5 minutes. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, welcome, and seem like you're becoming a regular member of this committee. I'm going to turn the channel towards the students and the temporary foreign workers that are in Canada with the Canadian Experience Class. And one of your mandates is to create a pathway to permanent residency for international students and temporary foreign workers. And IRCC hasn't held express entry draw for federal skilled workers program candidates since before the pandemic, and Canadian Experience Class draws has been paused since September 2021. And I've been asked repeatedly about when these draws will resume, because many workers are concerned about losing their status in Canada. Could you please touch on the plans that IRCC may have to resume the draws, which would help meet immigration level targets for this year?
Thank you very much, Mr. Dhaliwal. I appreciate the question, and this is important. And I know that there is an enormous community of interest that is watching this issue. It is my intention to do what I can to allow people to stay by extending postgraduate work permits or some proxy that will have the same result that may be as effective. One of the challenges that we're dealing with as a result of the pivot towards resettling people who were here temporarily during the pandemic as permanent residents, it hampered our ability to use the Federal Skilled Workers Program to a certain degree. I am focused very, very finely on the need to do whatever we can to address the labor shortage. There are significant numbers of people who are here now. I want to create an opportunity for them to stay and to continue to work. And it's very, very important that we do this. I don't have a specific date for you. We're working as quickly as we can. We have to finalize a little bit of policy work before we can roll out the kinds of changes that I'm talking about. But our goal is to allow those who are here working to stay and to continue working until they may have an opportunity to complete the PR process, whether it's through a federal skilled worker or CEC draw.
Okay, recent IRCC inventory data shows that in the past 2 months, IRCC was able to process over 4,700 Canadian Experience Class applications, and there were about 10,000 CEC person left to be processed at this date. It looks like IRCC will catch up this backlog, during the summer. But my question is that there's also a big backlog when it comes to reuniting the family members, whether it's the spousal cases or it is the parents of the Canadian. And what are your plans to catch up with that backlog?
So the processing challenges aren't unique to one line of business or another, though some are impacted to a different degree. There's three different categories of measures, if I can describe it that way, that we're dealing with to improve the situation. The first is resources, the second is technology, the third is spaces. On resources, I will have shared with you previously that we've hired more than 500 staff that are now fully trained and working and producing. In addition, the money in the economic and fiscal update, mostly on the temporary side of business, is going to make a meaningful difference. You would have seen from late January the announcement we made about certain technological features that are coming online, and I believe that was the subject of testimony before this committee previously, so I won't rehash all the details. Suffice it to say that the PR case tracker for family reunification is now online, and people can get real-time updates on their own files. A number of other measures that I can go into if you wish. Finally, on spaces, increasing the number of overall spaces will help us play catch up to a certain degree. But I will say that since January, we've now processed more than 143,000 PR applications. There was by the end of February, in the first 2 months, we saw more than 100,000 approvals. We are actually processing at a much faster pace than before the end of last year, and it's encouraging to see some of these investments take hold to make a very significant difference in terms of the rate that we've been able to process in the first few months of this year.
And in the parents class, is there going to be a draw soon? Because we haven't heard anything on that particular category.
So I'll apologize in advance because I don't have an announcement to make at committee today on the date of the next draw. One of the things that I think you and I have discussed before, Suk, and you've been a huge advocate, I have to say, for the parents and grandparents stream in particular, is to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is fair. It's a real challenge because we have almost 10 times as many applications as we historically have spaces. I will point out in the 2 seconds before I run out of time here that we do plan over the next few years increasing the spaces from 23,500 to 32,000, and we're going to continue to work to try to bring more people through this stream, including one of our former colleagues, the now mayor of Edmonton, who arrived onto the parents and grandparents stream when he was only 18 as he followed his family to Canada.
Thank you, Minister. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desep. Mr. Brunel Desep, you will have 2.5 minutes. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to note, as my colleague has done, you haven't been in position for a long time, and there were many problems that predate your coming into your position. But it is the Liberals that have been in power since 2015, and I've seen a lot of positive changes at the IRCC over the last few years, and I think that you're very sincere in your will to change things, Mr. Minister. And last Tuesday, we were told that an ombudsman position at immigration would mean that people could be better protected from unjust decisions, that people had injustices when the application decisions were being made. So I want to ask the question directly today. You want to change things. Are you for this proposal to create an ombudsman position at immigration?
Look, honestly, I need to do some more thinking on this particular proposal. I would love to come out and say, yes, I've made up my mind. It's this or it's that. It's an area that I do want to see the benefit of the testimony and the recommendations that come from this committee. And I expect, given your question, I know where you may land on this particular issue. But I also want to see an opportunity to determine whether some of the measures we're introducing to address some of these systemic problems can actually make a meaningful difference without necessarily having to go down the path of appointing an ombudsperson. So until I'm fully seized with the facts and the potential consequences of one path or another, I'll reserve judgment, but I do look forward to hearing more from what this committee has to say on this particular point.
Parfait. Mais je vais continuer à vous poser.
That's great, but I'm going to continue to ask questions. You said that there were different mechanisms that meant that for each applicant there were there were reasons. But what do you do when there's not a real good reason or adequate reason for a refusal?
So it's really important that I personally am not making the decisions on individual cases, and it's essential that the minister doesn't fetter to the discretion of those who are making
Monsieur le
decisions.
ministre, j'ai pas beaucoup de temps. Peut-être vous.
Minister, maybe you didn't understand my question. I'm not asking you to make a decision, but I'm asking, is there a mechanism that does exist for students? Maybe you didn't understand the question, Madam. He didn't understand the question, Madam Chair. So what are the mechanisms that are in place when there is a refusal and that there's no explanation for the refusal when there's an application? Where does the person go? What is the mechanism that exists for that person?
Largely speaking, the applications can be reconsidered. So there could be a reapplication. You could apply for reconsideration, or you could challenge in federal court. Look, as somebody who practiced law before I got into politics, that's not an option for many people. But the reality of the situation is that the decision-making process on independent case files has to remain independent from me. But the process to reapply remains available in most circumstances to people who are seeking to come to Canada.
Sorry for interrupting,
Ça
Minister.
serait bien un ombudsman à ce moment-là.
That would be great to have an ombudsman then.
Now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 2.5 minutes. You can please proceed.
Just to put it on the public record for the minister's information, the NDP's call for a ombudsperson for immigration in our platform for years now. So we certainly support that, and I think it absolutely is required. So I hope the minister will take that seriously and implement something like that. With respect to differential treatment, it doesn't start at one place, but actually is throughout the system. The committees has been advised that racialized women organizations are being treated differently. They've been asked for a detailed breakdown of admin budget costs when other sectors are not required to do so. Settlement officers have to provide additional information to substantiate and justify their decisions. And this extends to the clients as well. In India, there's hyper scrutiny for marriage fraud. Muslim female clients are being asked of questions of sexual nature with regards to their relationship with their male spouses as proof of marriage. For China, child sponsorship applications where DNA testing is often required. For Africa, genuine parent and child relationships are often questioned. So will the minister ensure that there is an independent review into these concerns as part of a larger independent review of systemic racism within IRCC and report his findings publicly?
Look, I'm open to digging into this. One of the things that I hesitate to do before we have an opportunity to address some of these challenges is to immediately react to say that the right thing to do is to ship it out to an independent body. To the extent that there are problems that we can address, I think it's incumbent upon me as the minister to address them before we start delaying by giving it to a third party. So, for example, questions about sexual activity for somebody who's trying to prove the legitimacy of their marriage is a heartbreaking situation for that person to go through. To the extent that we can deal with these sort of things by investing in training for officers, I don't think we need to wait for an independent report to tell us that that might be an appropriate thing to do. So to your question, look, I'm open to building this into a broader part of the anti-racism work going on within the department before I would commit to say we have to ship it out to a third party for an independent review. I'd have to satisfy myself that we're not able to do it on our own, even though I know we should.
All right, then is the minister admitting that there are these concerns that exist and that it is tied to systemic racism within the department?
Yeah, I want to be careful. I know that there's a temptation for anyone watching these scenarios to latch on to the specific words I use, and I don't believe that the entire organization is a racist organization. I don't believe that the entire organization is perfect. I think.
Sorry for interrupting, Minister. Time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Genius. You will have 4 minutes. Okay, it's Mr. Reddycop. Mr. Reddycop, you will have 4 minutes, and then we will end our round of questioning with Mr. Al-Khouri for another 4 minutes. So, Mr. Reddycop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to address, to me it seems a bit like an elephant in the room. We had the conflict in Afghanistan back in the last year, and it continues on. In August, the government stated it wanted to bring 40,000 Afghans. So far, there's been about 8,500. That's 8 months. It's about a little over 1,000 a month. this, of course, is a racialized community in Afghanistan. We've now had the conflict in Ukraine. You've stated that we brought 10,000 white Ukrainians in since in the last 3 months. That's triple the rate of Afghanistan. And certainly Ukrainians deserve to come here. They need help, but so do the others. And so I guess my question is for you is that under your watch, it seems like you've set up a racialized system, a two-tiered system, where white Europeans come in faster than people from Afghanistan. How do you explain that?
So look, thanks for this question. I think it's really important for people to understand that is not the motivation in any way, shape, or form. And with respect to the numbers, there's now approximately 9,400 Afghan refugees who've landed in Canada. I had an opportunity to meet with a number of our new neighbors who live in Alberta during a recent visit. The situation in Ukraine allows and demands a different response. With respect to Afghanistan, these are people, to use your language, that we are bringing here. These are people who are benefiting from the full suite of settlement supports, and we are doing it through a traditional refugee resettlement process. With respect to Ukraine, we've made it easier for people to come, and we are looking at what appropriate supports may look like. We're looking at how we can facilitate people's entry into Canada. But the 10,000 who've come have come from the beginning of the year and have largely come here under their own devices. It has more to do with their ability to leave Ukraine compared to the ability of those who don't have that ability to leave Afghanistan than it does a decision by the federal government to be more kind to one group of people than another.
But that's in effect what's happening, though. I mean, they're both people who are dealing with conflict, who are in terrible situations, and the system that you've set up makes it much easier. And to your point, you've made it very easy for them for Ukrainian people to come in as visitors, but you haven't extended that same ease of entry to Afghans. How do you explain that? That this doesn't seem right.
Yeah, look, and I understand the challenge that a lot of people have with it, and I share to some degree the sensitivities towards the need to do everything we can to support everyone who's vulnerable and fleeing conflict. But I would object just to one piece of your argument, if you'll allow me. It's not the government who's making it more difficult to leave Afghanistan than it is to leave Ukraine. It's the Taliban. The reality on the ground is that it is really challenging for people to leave. On the temporary nature of the program, one of the other challenges that we have faith because of the situation that's playing out, because of the situation being in flux, that there is a really serious possibility that the vast majority of people who want to seek safe haven in Canada actually wish to return to Ukraine. I've heard this from Ukrainians in Canada. I've heard this from the Commissioner of the European Union during a meeting this week, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that people go back to Ukraine when it's safe to do so. I really wish that were true in Afghanistan. But since the Taliban have seized control, I hate to admit that the likelihood that people who are coming here are going to be able to return is just not there. So we have to make a plan to support these people and to welcome them on a permanent basis, and that changes the tools we can use.
The election, of course, threw a big wrench into that. But at the end of the day, there's way more ways to process biometrics near Ukraine, which aren't available in Afghanistan. I mean, these are things that you, as a department, can set up. You can impact, and so I believe that you're making it more difficult for Afghans to get here as well by not having the systems and processes that need to be in place for this to happen.
Sorry for interrupting.
Time passage for people fleeing Afghanistan. Biometrics will be something that will be a part of that approach.
Thank you, Minister. We will now have Mr. Al-Khouri for 4 minutes. Mr. Al-Khouri, you can please begin.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you for being very generous with us and coming to answer our questions many times. Mr. Minister, for the last few months as Minister, you have been able to create of Canada an example to follow. And so congratulations. I really want to congratulate you for that, knowing that the department has set up algorithmics to be able to do advanced analytics for visa applications. Can you please explain more how this type of evaluation has allowed the reducing bias with these advanced analytics?
So the key point for me when it comes to the use of advanced analytics is really about the making sure that we can process cases as efficiently as possible without compromising on the integrity of the process and ensuring that every applicant gets a fair chance to make their application and have that application heard. When we use advanced analytics, essentially what it does is it identifies the simple cases that don't have any complexity. So think of somebody who's come and returned to Canada many times and has always followed the rules. The use of advanced analytics can identify that application and make sure that it's being dealt with by someone in the department who will be able to process it fairly quickly. For situations that have complexities, maybe there was a securities flag on a file, maybe it involves factors that lead to somebody needing to take a deeper look. That will go through the ordinary assessment process and still benefit from an officer who has to go through all of the application information. So it's essentially a sorting mechanism that is yielded on those non-complex cases an 87% increase in efficiency. If we're dealing with the non-complex cases that are or far more likely to be approved without having to go down and do a deeper analysis, it makes sense to me because the people who are going into that side of the assessment are not being prejudiced. They're being treated more quickly. To the extent that there are people who may have more complex cases, every single file still has to be reviewed and approved by a human being who works for IRCC, not a computer system. The system doesn't make recommendations, it doesn't make approvals or rejections, but it does allow on those simpler cases to deal with them in a more expeditious way.
Merci. Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Can you briefly describe with more precision how this program has been conceived for Afghanistan and Syria as well as for Ukraine?
Just brièvement.
Just briefly.
Sorry, my sound is having a problem. Would you mind repeating the question?
Pourriez-vous nous décrire?
Can you describe with more precision how the program has been, what are the differences between the programs for Afghanistan, Syria as compared to Ukraine?
Certainly. So Afghanistan is, though a unique situation, a rather traditional refugee response with some really unique innovations. So with respect to Afghanistan, it's traditional in the sense that we will be getting people to Canada, extending to them the full range of settlement supports that refugees typically receive. But it's unique in the way that we've identified the special immigration measures for those who've made a significant and enduring contribution to Canada. It's unique in the way that we've built in a family reunification component for the extended families of previously resettled interpreters. And then it's, again, more traditional in the way that we're embracing people who are fleeing persecution based on who they are as a person. With respect, Madam Chair, is my time ended?
Yes, if you can quickly wrap up in next 30 seconds.
Okay. Certainly. With respect to Ukraine, the situation is unique because we're dealing with a country where people have maintained access to leave in a westerly direction. And we believe through many conversations that a lot of the people are not looking to move permanently to Canada. Some are, and we are developing a family sponsorship stream for that specific purpose. But the people who are coming here are likely to go back. So in an emergency, we created a temporary program that allows them to get here. And we've pulled off almost all of the requirements that would normally lead to a person being rendered inadmissible to Canada, so we can welcome more people as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Minister. So with this, our first panel comes to an end. And on behalf of all the members of this committee, Minister, I really want to thank you for taking out the time to appear before the committee and take questions from the members of the committee. So thank you, Minister. And now we will go to the officials. The clerk has already done the sound checks, so we can proceed with our second panel. So if I can ask the officials to please on their cameras so that we can begin our round of questioning. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members. I sincerely appreciate your willingness to dedicate so much time and energy to such an important topic. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I look forward to seeing your report.
Okay.
Thank you for being accessible as well.
So I would welcome our officials, Carolyn Xavier, Associate Deputy Minister, Pammy Gill, Director General International Network, and Farah Boyce-Clare, Director Anti-Racism Task Force. So we can go direct into our round of questioning, and we will start with Mr. Redekop. Mr. Redekop, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start with Bangladesh. The High Commissioner appeared at this committee asking for the country of Bangladesh to be admitted into the student direct stream. I specifically asked the minister on March the 3rd if he could make every effort to have Bangladesh enter into the direct stream program for foreign students, and his answer was he's certainly open to it. So for the Associate Deputy Minister, it's been 20 days or so. First of all, has the minister talked to you about getting Bangladesh into the student direct stream?
Thank you for the question. I haven't been spoken to directly by the minister with regards to opening the student direct stream to Bangladesh, but that does not mean that that's not something being worked on in the department. We have many streams in which we're exploring where that may be possible, and we have to ensure that the country would be able to meet the conditions required for the SDS. So
can you confirm that Bangladesh? Can you confirm that Bangladesh is in process of being considered for SDS right now?
I cannot personally confirm it, but I can double check unless Pemmy Gill has that information, and it doesn't seem that she does. So no, I cannot confirm it to you at this moment in time.
Okay, thanks. That's disappointing. I want to switch over to the Polaro report and the obvious report of racism in the senior management ranks, and in particular, it mentioned this. And I know that the minister just spoke about that more needs to be done for senior managers, and my colleague, Mr. Janius, asked if there were consequences, and we didn't actually get an answer to that question. So I just want to ask you, Associate Deputy Minister, about the bonuses. Can you confirm that there were bonuses paid to senior management in IRCC for the last year?
So thank you for your question. Yes, I can confirm that executives throughout the organization have received performance pay as per the normal process of performance management.
That's good. Was anyone's bonus withheld or reduced because of that they exhibited racial bias?
So as the minister said, there is zero tolerance with regards to racism, discrimination, and harassment within the department, and we are very committed to doing what is necessary to bring change within the department.
So were there bonuses changed or reduced?
What I can say is I won't be able to speak specifically to cases, but what I can say is that the anti-racism strategy and work we're doing is very much linked to the performance management reviews of all of our managers and executives within the department.
So can you confirm that somebody actually, you don't have to give names or anything, but was there at least one case where somebody had their bonus reduced because of exhibiting racial bias, or is that non-existent in senior management?
I would not say that it's non-existent, but I cannot confirm to you that there was a specific case to that effect. Having said that, what I can say is that we take this very seriously as part of the performance review of all of our management discussions with regards to how a person has behaved, and the racism aspect of it in terms of the behavior, or if there were issues within their organization, this would be part of the assessment of the performance bonus.
So are you saying then that there are clauses, there are words that speak to the performance assessment, and you can provide that to the committee?
Yes, I can tell you that all of our performance management accords clearly identify what our expectations are with regards to committing to the anti-racism strategy of our department, including taking unconscious bias training, as well as of April 1st, any manager that will have delegated authority must again take unconscious bias training to ensure that they're adhering to the behavior and expectations we have of them.
Yet there are no impacts on pay, which is very disappointing from what I'm hearing you saying. I want to switch over and talk about the Filipino community in my riding is very significant. There's a Filipino woman in my riding who had terminal breast cancer. She had a deportation order against her, and IRC issued that order mainly because her husband had decided he was done with her and he divorced her. And so CBSA was carrying out an order made by IRCC that was clearly based in racism because a white man was dumping his terminally ill wife from Philippines. And so we have human trafficking laws to protect vulnerable women like this. So my question is, what steps is the Racism Task Force taking to address issues of bias in IRCC officers when dealing with issues of human trafficking, like this case in my riding?
Thank you for your question. So again, as I mentioned before, the anti-racism strategy is being baked into every part of our organization, and that includes the policy development, the client service delivery, as well as the everyday management of what we're aiming to do in the department. So training is being provided to all decision makers, especially those that would have to process some of these applications that you're mentioning. And so in ensuring that those decisions are addressed in a more consistent manner, there's also review of how decisions are taken within the organization to ensure that that consistency of the act is applied, and including looking at what could be perceived as bias in the decisions. So it is very much part of the training to ensure that people are making the decisions based on the facts before them and not on the race.
Thank you. I would strongly encourage you to put pay into that matrix as well. I asked an order paper question on the average time for temporary foreign workers to be approved. For family home child care providers, the average is 684 days. That's 2 years. The sports referees can come in 85 days, or government public relations is 4 days. What steps are being taken to eliminate the racial biases against Filipino women who are coming in as home care providers and have the approval process sped up?
So again, one of the things that we're working really actively is on ensuring that our decision makers are culturally aware, culturally sensitive, have the necessary training required to be able to make the right decisions. And the caregiver program is one that is a priority for the department.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Mr. Redekop. You will get an opportunity in the second round. We will now proceed to MP Ali. MP Ali, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, officials, for being here. In 2020, the approval rate for temporary resident visas for spouses and partners with a spousal sponsorship application was 46%. However, individuals residing in a visa-exempt country who only need to apply for an electronic travel authorization had a 90% approval rate. Please explain to the committee this difference in approval rates. And question on this: why are the applicants from visa-exempt countries more successful with their applications than those from countries requiring visas? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. Not knowing exactly the specific cases you're speaking of, it is true that someone who is able to apply to an electronic travel authorization from a non-visa requiring country has to complete that process and has to be truthful in its application and process. So a person without a visa obviously has a faster way of being able to apply for a temporary visit to Canada. Once, however, a person
sorry to interrupt. I'm not speaking for the specific cases. It's overall in 2020, the application approval rate was 46%, but 90% approval rates where you don't have, you only need electronic travel authorization. These are the stats.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Pemi Gill, who may have a better opportunity to share some additional information that I don't have handy.
Thank you for the clarifications on the question. With regards to ETA, the electronic travel authorization is a means to confirm for entry of visa-exempt clients. However, it doesn't require the same eligibility requirements as the temporary resident program. So clients who are applying under the temporary resident program do need to demonstrate the bona fides for their visit, as well as provide the other required documentation. ETA clients are exclusively required to register such that we have information of who is entering the country. So the two are not comparable from a program design perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The Immigration and Refugee Act requires spouses going through a sponsorship process to prove to visa officers that their relationship is genuine. What are the factors used to assess the genuineness of the relationship for the family reunification or sponsorship applications? And then my second question on same same issue: what might be expected in a Western construct might not be appropriate in another construct. are officers trained to have culturally sensitive ways to judge the genuineness of the marriage?
So thank you for your question. So when assessing the relationship between spouses and common law partners, officers must be satisfied that the relationship that exists is genuine. And that's irrelevant of which country from where the application is being processed. The application kit requires that the applicant submit certain documents as proof of the relationship, and that could include things such as pictures and things of that nature. In the case of applicants in the spouse or common law partner in Canada class, officers must also be satisfied that the applicant is living with the sponsor in Canada. So if documents submitted do not provide adequate proof of that genuine conjugal relationship within the context of a marriage or common law relationship, or if officers doubt that the applicant is living with the sponsor, for example, an officer may again request additional information or schedule an interview to be able to confirm the genuinity of the relationship.
When officers suspect if there's certain things that there's not genuine application, in that interview, are you aware that they do ask certain questions related to their sexual relationship? Are you aware of that?
So I'm going to ask Pemi to answer your question with more precision than I may.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. So for family class applications, spousal, conjugal relationship as well as, conjugal partner as well as common law, the requirements under IRPA indicate assessment of a genuine relationship, and there are different qualifications for each of those three subcategories in family class. For the most part, the assessment is done based on the evidence that is provided by clients, and the assessment's done on paper. If there is insufficient information for the officer to be satisfied, then an interview may be required or additional documents are requested. As part of the interview process, officers who undertake those interviews have undergone the unconscious bias training. They're also seized with cultural issues and being aware of the local context in which they're doing the interview. So for the most part, our first attempt is always to have evidence provided by the clients that addresses the concerns that are being raised. And it's only in circumstances where that is insufficient is an interview one of the options looked at for further assessment.
Thank you. Do you encounter fraud in these sort of cases in spousal? I guess, do we have any stats that what's the percentage do you find that they, I think my time is up. Oh, sorry, I just had a 4.5 minute here.
No, it's 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
Time is up.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desep. Mr. Brunel Desep, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses who are here with us today to take your time for this very important study. So thank you for being here once again. We know that you're confronted with a real problem, a systemic problem at the IRCC. I think that the minister does express his desire that there not be discrimination towards people coming from certain parts of the world. So my question is the following. Who do your agents go to, your officers go to, if they have been a victim of racism? Well, thank you for your question. As the minister said, we have an anti-racism strategy, and we don't want to see any discrimination. We take it very serious. So if somebody is experienced that, what we've done, especially personally, since I have arrived, and so if there's anything that I've witnessed, is we say, if you ever witness anything, say so. And so you can go see your immediate manager, and you can go to the senior official of internal disclosure, and you can go to the Office of Conflict Resolution, and you can do it. You can inform the Anti-Racist Task Force. So there are different people and places where you can go if you have a problem. Sometimes there may be people who don't have who don't trust the system. And some people know that there is a cost, a personal cost, when you have to go through this type of conversation. So personally, I think that it is even better that we do have an opportunity to have the conversation, because when there's stigmatization, even to speak about racism, we need to be open and to be aware that there are gaps and there are things that need to be addressed. Well, I do feel that you are sincere in your response, but you've probably seen or read, as I have, reports from employees who say that they don't have the tools to be able to express the negative effects on their career. And so I think that this is a sensitive situation. It doesn't help to solve the problems of racism. So what can you do? Well, thank you very much for the question. We do know that people who are victims of racism or who have experienced this type of situation are very worried if they have to express themselves about it, because they're concerned for their careers. So what we've created are trust circles, and there they can have conversations, voluntary conversations directly with someone at my level, the deputy minister, or within the higher management, so that they are able to share their experience. And so this is an opportunity for them to be able to express themselves. But there's nobody else that's going to be aware of the fact that they participate in this trust circle. So this is something that does help us to be aware of issues. So if they have this worry that it's going to be a problem for their advancing in their career, if employees have to bring up racism and that it's going to affect, if they're worried about it, that it will affect their careers, does that mean that within the past there were people that did come forward with situations and then were affected in their careers? Well, it's true. As my minister has said, the systemic racism does exist all through government, within our department also. And we're aware of the fact that we do need to make improvements in terms of managing the situation. However, it's clear that there have been people that have experienced such things. I've heard such things myself, where people shared that they feel that they did have problems, for example, in their career when they came forward. And that's why we're putting forward concrete action so that we can better manage people of color or racialized people for their career advancement, so that they have opportunities for development and for interim positions, and so that we can put people into new positions, so we'll be able to ensure that they're able to advance in their career and that we can have better representation in their department. Well, I'm sorry, but I think this very interesting discussion, if it's already occurred that you have had such discussions and you are aware of the fact that people felt that they were not able to advance in their career because they spoke up about situations of racism, that would mean that there was somebody that was responsible for stopping their moving forward in the career. So who do we have the names of those people? Did something happen to them? As I said, it's clear that we are aware of the fact that there are situations. We know it because we've done surveys within the department. Since 2020, we did an anti-racist survey. So we were able to get an outside company to do a report, because we wanted to get a better understanding, an in-depth understanding of how people can come forward in a voluntary process. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't have much time. I'm very sorry, but I don't want to be rude. But if people did go through this situation and they know that this has happened, did those people that were guilty of racism, did they have any penalties? Were they laid off? I can tell you that all things that were brought up were managed with everything we do. We don't want to ignore the situation. And when it becomes a situation, personally myself, when we're become aware of something, we take action. Thank you very much.
We'll now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The minister spoke of wanting to ensure IRCC has an equitable representation amongst his staff, both among agents and medium and upper management positions. Could the officials provide a breakdown of that representation right now so that we have a baseline to evaluate the outcome of this work?
So thank you for your question. As I mentioned previously, we have recently launched, well, within the last 2 years, our anti-racism task force. And one of the things that we did was run a survey. And the purpose for running that survey was the opportunity to be able to see how we're progressing as a department. Yes, we're able to provide you with some information with regards to how we're progressing in terms of where the racialized individuals are progressing within the career, because one of the things that is part of our strategy is to achieve a higher target of individuals throughout the department.
Thank you. I have limited time, so if I could just sort of get direct answers to my question. My question is, can we get the baseline number so then we can evaluate this progress? And further to that then, will there be interim progress reports that would be put on the public record on this work?
Yes, we can provide you with the baseline information that we have in our possession. And part of our strategy is to be able to continue to demonstrate progress on how we're meeting our targets. And one of the things that we're aiming to achieve is for the labor market availability representation within our department and not just the workforce availability. So we're aiming to achieve a higher target than what is sometimes expected.
When can we expect the interim progress report and the final report?
Well, the final report, I don't want to say that there is one because it's always going to be for us to continue to progress. So it is a 3-year plan that we have. However, we can at least definitely tell you where we started when we started our strategy and where we are now at this point in time.
Would there be an interim report made public, let's say in a year's time, maybe each year within the 3 years?
Definitely. We are putting out reports on a regular basis. And I can tell you already, if you go on the Privy Council Office website, there are a call to action that the clerk put in place.
Thank you. Thank you. I just need a quick answer. Sorry, I don't have that much time. The Polari report exposed that there is racism and discrimination within IRCC, and witnesses have indicated that there needs to be follow-up with individuals who share those experiences. Will the department be undertaking to do that work to ensure that there's follow-up with those individuals specifically who's identified racist experiences?
So again, thank you for your question. We are not going to be able to specifically follow up with those individuals because this was a volunteer approach, and we do not know the individuals that were specifically met by Polara. We did that intentionally so that they did not have a fear of any type of reprisal and did not have a fear of truthfully sharing what they felt. And so we cannot follow up specifically to those cases. Having said that, every case that is brought to our attention, we address with the tools we have in our toolkit with regards to reprimand and the necessary steps required to ensure that it is recognized that it's unacceptable behavior to have racism and discrimination in our department.
Maybe what the department should do is actually undertake another independent study with respect to that, so those individuals can come forward and not fear reprisal and share in-depth experience where those comments came from. That's the only way you can actually get at the heart of the problem. And I hope the ministry will undertake that work and do a further follow-up independent study in that regard.
Thank you. I was just going to say thank you for that recommendation. I can tell you further independent studies are planned as part of our strategy.
If you can table for the committee then the timelines of when that further study will be done and the mandate for those studies, I would appreciate that.
If you'd like, I could ask Faraldine Boisclair to give you a few of those details right away, if you'd like.
Maybe just table it because I'm going to run out of time. Okay. A witness indicated that there's been little to no progress with respect to processing for the caregiver streams since 2019. So can officials advise what is the magnitude of the backlog in the caregiver streams? As well, IRCC does not have processing standards for these streams. So when can applicants expect their applications to be processed?
So as the minister mentioned, we have been given some funding to be able to really address the processing backlogs that we have. And I can assure you that this is very much a priority for the department, and we're working really hard to achieve a progress in all of the business lines. So what I can tell you is that in April 2021, the department introduced this ambitious plan of processing applications from caregivers, and applications for nearly 6,000 persons, including both caregivers and their family members, were finalized by the end of 2021. So we're going to continue to do some of that ongoing work.
Yeah, but you know, because many of those cases are in the backlog. When you say 6,000 persons, that is not so many applications because each family is more than one person. And so it doesn't actually give an accurate number. And then you're also not indicating how far does the backlog go. Some of them has been on the wait list for 5-6 years. You know, people have been waiting for a long time. Adding those numbers to it does not actually help provide clarity. All you're doing is trying to sort of whitewash the reality of the backlog, and that's not helpful. So actually, accurate information and precise information is required. What I'm asking now, though, with the new resources, what is the standard processing time? How long do people have to wait to get their application processed?
Once an application has obtained 24 months of qualifying work experience, they have to submit the necessary documents. My understanding is we aim to have this done within 12 months. So that is the standard that we're aiming for these applications. You're absolutely right, though, in the comment about the fact that the longer people stay in the applications, it becomes aged. But that is part of the strategy to
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Xavier. Time is up for Ms. Kwan. We will now proceed to Mr. Janius. Mr. Janius, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the officials. In some categories, whether someone is able to come to Canada or not is significantly impacted by determinations by the UNHCR. The minister has acknowledged that he says he's concerned about systemic racism within the department and impacting determinations here. Do you have concerns about instances of systemic bias involving race or religion at the UNHCR? And given that those determinations impact who gets to come to Canada, what is being done to address that?
Thank you for your question. We have a excellent relationship with the UNHCR, one that dates for some time. They are a recognized partner, not just for ourselves, but for many like-minded countries in the refugee management stream. At this point, I am not aware of cases that have been brought to our attention with regards to the possibility that they may have biases in the refugee management process. They have a clear definition of what a refugee definition is, and they work with us for us to help define what are Canada's priorities and needs. And so at this point in time, I'm not saying that this may not exist. However, I'm not aware that this is a concern that's been raised. But it's something, though, thank you for the question, that we can maybe explore further.
I'm a bit surprised that you haven't heard that, because this is a concern that's routinely raised with me in conversation with diaspora communities here in Canada. Are you in dialogue with representatives of diaspora communities about the UNHCR process? Have you not heard these concerns? Have they raised these concerns but not been received in some way? What's happening on that front?
So we engage regularly with various stakeholders that are part of our various business lines, including diaspora and other stakeholders that make part of the support network, for example, in our settlement integration sectors. Ongoing stakeholder engagement is a very instrumental part of how we manage the way we do our business. I cannot say that I have had this particular situation that you're flagging raised to my attention or to that of my officials, because if we'd had, it would be something we would address. So if you've got some examples that you think that would be pertinent to share, we would welcome receiving them so that we can follow up.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I will follow up, and I'll ask certain communities that I've been working with on this if and how they would like to follow up with the department directly. Let me ask about the tracking of data. A lot of the conversation we're having here is about differential outcomes as revealed by country comparisons. That may not, though, show the whole picture in terms of differential outcomes on the basis of race or other criteria. You can't always identify race by country. So, by country of origin, what data do you collect in terms of the race of applicants and acceptance that would allow you to analyze other indicators of bias besides just a possible bias besides just country of origin?
Thank you for your question. So we do recognize that data plays a very important part in terms of the management of our anti-racism strategy writ at large, both from an internal perspective as well as external. So, and in particular, an area that we're very interested in pursuing is the aspect of disaggregated data. And this comes to the point that you're making in how we might collect more detailed information from our applicants. However, at this point, much of the information related to that type of data is given to us on a voluntary basis. It is not a mandated element related to IRPA, so we have to be respectful of that. So it is something that continues to play. As you said, it's hard to do a comparison one for one, because we have to take into consideration many aspects and criteria. But disaggregated data and the ongoing management of that data is something that is part of the toolkit of where we want to improve.
Okay, so if I understand, you're saying the answer is no, you don't collect that data, you don't have that data, but you're sort of thinking about it and interested in possibly doing it for the future. And can I just ask, is the same true of religion? Do you have data fields to identify the religion of applicants so that you can do those comparisons? And are you considering looking at disaggregated data on the basis of religion as well?
Do with regards to disaggregated data, but what
I'm sorry, could you just start your response again, because there was a bit of a technical problem.
Okay, sorry. What I was saying is that we are very much wanting to explore what we can do in the space of disaggregated data. But what I've said is that right now, much of this data is provided to us on a voluntary basis. And so at this point, it's not to say we don't have some of that information. It's just that it's not considered by.
And you can't analyze the data if
time is up,
not everybody
Mr.
gives it, right? So, yeah, thanks.
Time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Al-Khoury. Mr. Al-Khoury, you will have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Madame Boisclair. The IRCC has taken steps to deal with bias in applications for citizenship. And can you tell us how you're going to do further work to be able to solve this problem? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of things that need to be done, and one of the things that we've done early on the anti-racism task force is to articulate what does anti-racism work look like in different parts of the organization. And so it's a range. It ranges from policy review, program review, developing an anti-racism lens. For example, we've developed practice analyst and policy development. And so these specific actions have been integrated in the executives and leaders across the organization in their performance agreement plans, which is tied to their performance ratings. And yeah, so that's one of the things that we've done.
Sachant que IRCC,
knowing that IRCC has more than 12 projects underway with equality as a concern, are you able to give us any details with respect to these efforts?
Pour Madame Boisclair, donc je vais lui laisser.
I think Madame Boisclair would be best to answer this. Yes, we do have different efforts underway. For example, one of the actions that we have right now is to review employment systems. And we're very excited to go ahead with this review that is happening this coming season.
Making sure that our recruitment processes are targeted so that we find racialized talent to occupy all levels of the organization. I think the work that we've done on data collection, the Polera group included, is us being intentional about looking at the problem and understanding the problem of systemic racism so that we can take thoughtful solutions, so we can bring thoughtful solutions to the table. And that information collection that we have does inform our strategies moving forward.
Parfait, merci. Est-ce qu'il y a possibilité?
Thank you very much. Would you be able to provide details in terms of the quality assurance program that was set up in 2021? Thank you for that question. What I can say that in effect that we do, as you said, we do have a program that allows us to confirm that decisions were applied consistently, especially decisions that were made abroad. And so, yes, we can provide data to that effect that will give you more information as to what we have learned with respect to these studies as to the decisions that were made. Pammy, I don't know if you might have more to add on that.
Thank you, Deputy. To add on to that, we take oversight of decision-making very seriously at IRCC, and there are quality assurance exercises that are undertaken annually for decision-making. So for our officers, they've all undergone the unconscious bias. They are trained on immigration legislation. And in addition to that, then there are cultural studies for certain case types. So for example, for our caseloads out of Africa, all of our decision makers do cultural studies as well in advance of starting their decision making. With that, we also then have the oversight of quality assurance exercises for their decisions.
Okay. Madame Xavier, pourriez-vous donner de plus?
Madam, can you give us more details with respect to your working group that you set up in July 2020 and to give the department a strategic orientation on the management of staff, on policies, as well as service program delivery? Well, thank you very much for the question. As you noted, this program was set up in July 2020.
Time is up for Mr. El Khoury. So we will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desep. Mr. Brunel Desep, you will have 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madame Xavier. I'd like to come back to the conversation that we had earlier. If employees who witness racism and if it's towards their superiors who may put pressure that may not be allowing to have promotions, as we were talking about earlier, where is there independence for processing those cases? Well, thank you very much for that question. As I said earlier, there's more than one avenue for an employee if they're witness. So yes, sometimes they can speak with their supervisor, but that's not the only opportunity that they have. They can talk with the senior official, an independent person within the department, and they can also bring the situation to the attention of the officer of the conflict resolution, who is another independent actor. And they can also get help from and work with their union, in partnership with their union, which is independent. Another opportunity is to speak with somebody at another level, whether it is the Associate Deputy Minister or somebody else at another level of the hierarchy. Is there a problem? You don't hear me? I think there's a bit of an issue with the sound there. It broke up. Well, I can hear you. You know, I can hear you now. It just cut from it. I think we need...
Interpretation.
I think we're getting interpretation. Can we continue? Okay, well, I was about to interrupt you because I don't have much time. So I understand that there are different measures, and I understand that this is part of your wanting to change things, that there are structures that have been set up. We know that it's not everybody who is a part of the union, and so measures that have been set up in the structures, that this still is within the department. So at that point, do you not think that an ombudsman for immigration would solve all of these problems, and that would really be some something that would be independent of the department. Is that not something that could help a lot to have an ombudsman independent? Well, thank you for this comment. As the minister has said, we are open to improving the situation. We're very, very open to that. I understand what the minister said, but I'd like to have your opinion on the ombudsman issue. It says that I'm not here to give you my opinion. So just to say that this is, I can tell you that this is an option that we're looking at. And this is something our minister is interested in, the government is interested. So this is absolutely something that we'll be looking into. The recommendations of this committee will be looked at and to improve the situation in our efforts. Well, thank you very much.
To Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 2.5 minutes. You can please begin.
Can officials advise what immigration measures are available to refugees in Ukraine, i.e. Afghans and other racialized minorities, and how they can get to safety in Canada?
So thank you for your question. So we are definitely conscious of the fact that it's not just Ukrainians that are fleeing Ukraine, and we are working with the countries that are surrounding Ukraine, where refugees are making their way to them, for example, in Poland, Germany, and other surrounding countries. And what we are recognizing that in some cases, some of those that are fleeing may find refuge within the neighboring countries more directly, or they may return to the country of origin. Having said that, should they have an interest to come to Canada, the options and pathways exist for them to be able to indicate that, and we would be able to assist them. That is not something that is automatically something that we've seen.
Can you table those pathways to the committee, please? Because actually, I have been contacted by refugees in Ukraine who wish to come to Canada, and I don't know where to send them to. Even if they made it to Poland or other countries for safety, they still wish to come to Canada. So I would love to actually get that information from the officials.
So can I share?
Sorry, can you just table that information? Because I don't have time to sort of get into it. I'd like to ask, to what extent has IRCC processed the emails that Afghans were directed to send to the government? And how many of those emails have received a response? And I don't mean the standard automatic response. And lastly, could I also ask, what work is being done by the department to coordinate and facilitate the generosities of Canadians who wish to help Ukrainians arriving in Canada? For example, people who are offering their homes to host them. We need a coordinated effort to galvanize the strength of Canadians who wish to help. And so I'm running out of time. If I don't get answers here, if you can table the response to those questions.
Thank you for your question. So just for clarity, I think your first question was on Afghanistan and the second one on Ukraine. Just want to be certain that I understood that clearly.
Correct.
Okay, on the first part of your question with regards to Afghanistan, we do have a dedicated service channel where people are able both to call and send emails. I do not have those stats with me at this point, but I can definitely follow up with sharing you the statistics, because we do track the number of calls received, and there's a very high percentage answer rate to those individuals that call and to the emails that are sent. They're all acknowledged and responded to. With regards to
Thank you, Ms. Xavier. Time is up for Ms. Kwan. We will now proceed.
Madam Chair, just on the point of order. In my question, I asked if I didn't get a response to those questions, I could get it tabled. So if I could get confirmation from the officials for that.
Absolutely, we can follow up and give you an answer to your the Ukrainian part of that question as well.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Benson. Mr. Benson, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. Earlier today, the minister said that the main purpose of the AI technology was to filter all of the files into 2 cases, either very simple cases or very complex cases. I'm just curious, of all the files, what proportion is simple and how many are complex?
Thank you for your question. I don't know if I have the stats handy, but perhaps Pemmy Gill has them handy. But I will say, just to begin to answer your question, as was stated by the minister, not, many applications that are repeat clients, for example, would be potentially seen as something non-complex because we have a great deal of information on them already. The fact that we issued them a visa already, they're in good standing and things of that nature. But you're specifically asking for statistics, so I will see if Pemi Gill has some information for you.
Hello. Unfortunately, I don't have an exact statistic for you. Depending on the program, the models would yield different results. So, for example, as the deputy had stated, when we use advanced analytics for visitor applications, we are looking for low complexity versus more complexity. And low complexity is often that they've previously traveled to Canada, they've previously traveled elsewhere, or other factors that would attribute to low complexity.
One of the things, so what I'm getting at here is I'm just curious. So we spent a huge amount of money, invested a huge amount of money in the software. Do we know how much money we've invested in the software? I'm just curious, this program.
So when you say this program, you're speaking of the advanced analytics software?
Yes. How much money have we invested in this?
I can definitely get back to you with that, as I don't have that information with me at this moment in time. Having said that, it isn't, from my awareness, a piece of software that's extremely complex. So it's not one that I expect we've spent a whole lot of money on.
Okay.
As you know,
no, that's good. That's good. That's interesting. We had a professor on here on Tuesday who felt, he was very concerned that the data that we were putting into the AI system was already tainted, that it was already biased. Some of the data, not all the data, but some of the data was biased and maybe already presidential. Do you think his concerns are legitimate?
As was mentioned before, we ensure that our employees are effectively trained to be able to make the decisions they're making, and that includes anti-racism and unconscious bias training. However, I'm going to ask Pemi to give you some additional information.
Thank you. Our IRCC's advanced analytics models are compliant with the Treasury Board Directive on automated decision making, and algorithm impact assessments are done on the models, and those are available on the Open Government website. As part of the development of the model, there is definitely extensive review process for potential discriminatory impacts. Rules are vetted by subject matter experts to determine that they reflect the legislative and regulatory requirements. And the system is also subject to a host of due diligence activities, including legal review, privacy impact analysis, and gender-based analysis plus, in order to identify and mitigate risks.
So basically you're saying you don't think his concerns are legitimate, that the system is working as it's supposed to be. Would that be a fair statement?
What I think, no, what we're saying is that we know that as an organization, we continue to have work that we need to do with regards to ensuring that the training that we're providing our officers in terms of anti-racism and unconscious bias needs to continue to be a priority for us. And so we need to continue to explore what the outcomes are of these decisions and explore whether or not what the stakeholder has mentioned is definitely something of concern.
Okay, excellent. In response to the Polaro report, one of the things you started was this new quality assurance program. And you picked 4 countries to start off with, Colombia, Brazil, Panama, and Costa Rica. Why did you pick those 4 countries for the pilot program? And also, why are there no African countries in this group?
I'm going to ask Pemi Gill to answer your question.
Thank you. As part of our quality assurance work, we do quality assurance across all processing from all countries. So there have been pilots being done to improve the types of QA done, continuous improvement to ensure that results are accurate and informing future improvements. There is quality assurance done on cases out of Africa as well. As I said, for our global network, it is undertaken.
In particular, why were these?
Thank you, Mr. Benson. Mr. Benson, your time is up. We will now end our panel today with 5 minutes for Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you can please begin. You will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the officials appearing here. Madam Chair, I have one of the highest constituency loads, and it's very frustrating to see my staff getting frustrated when, particularly when it comes to the super visa application, visitor visa applications from India. There was a deadline, for September the 7th, 2021. The application prior to that, I think there were over 500,000 applications. The department failed on that particular issue because none of those applications get processed. And then they started accepting on a new portal after September the 7th, 2021. And now it's my understanding there are over 500,000 applications. Some of the discrepancy that I see, some people are applying now and they get the results in 2 weeks, and people are waiting their parents to get to them for 2 years. And I am just wondered how they can manage this mess that's been created in New Delhi.
Thank you for your question. Family unification continues to be a priority for the government of Canada, and it plays a significant role, as you've outlined, in attracting, retaining, and integrating immigrants who contribute to our successful country. So we do recognize that there are various applications that are in the backlog. We know that the volumes are high, and this is where, again, the funding that we've been provided will be helpful in helping us to address that backlog of which you raise. As the minister mentioned, with regards to PGP parents, grandparents, and super visas, as you mentioned, this also continues to be part of the applications we're processing, and recognize that in some cases it may be perceived that others are getting a response sooner, and that may just be because their application came in a digital form while others perhaps were in a paper form. Having said that, that doesn't excuse it, and this is where the work we're doing with regards to improving the backlogs and addressing the more ancient or dated, aged applications is part of the next steps we're taking.
That is not the case, Madam Chair. After September the 7th, 2021, all those applications that for temporary resident visas are on the new portal, and they're all electronic applications, and there should be no excuse, because the reason I'm seeing it is time and time again, people are on our doorsteps. They're frustrated, devastated to get their loved ones to be here, and it's not the answer that solved that problem that I got from the official. And I want to see what are the tangible steps that the department will take to make sure all those applications that they accepted get to it ASAP.
I thank you for your question. I totally understand the frustration, and I'm not trying to not answer you, and I'm going to ask Pemi to give you some additional details that'll be more concrete to give you some information.
Thank you. So for the post-September 7th temporary resident visa application, right now the processing times are approximately 59 calendar days, and that's as of February 2022. We recognize there is a significant backlog predating that that has built up during COVID as a result of the border restrictions for entry into Canada. The approach that we've been taking is to focus on the newer cases in the immediate term and continue to make progress on the backlog of pre-September cases as well. We recognize for some of our clients who are in urgent need of travel that the sitting in the backlog is not beneficial. For those clients, we would recommend that they submit a new application, particularly given how dated the application is.
I can tell you, Ms. Gill, the 59 days is not the answer. I can see I have application, hundreds of those that are post September 7th, and they have not been even touched. And it's been over, like, look at from September to today, it's not 59 days. And I have talked to IMED myself, and they had no answer there as well. And I don't think you are providing the information that is correct. And there are hundreds and hundreds of applications. I can bring it to you that are not processed in 59 days. Those are the post-September 7th applications.
If I may, if it's helpful, we would be able to submit what are those statistics, be able to provide what is factual information in our system so that we can demonstrate what the numbers actually are, if that's okay with the chair.
I would like to, Madam Chair, I would like to have that submission made prior to September 7th. and also post September 7th, the exact number of days that it took to process the application and the expected numbers that it will be processed in the next month or so.
Ms. Xavier, if you can provide that information to the clerk of the committee, so we will circulate that information to all the members. I think it will be very helpful as we continue our study on this topic. So
Would
with
be
that,
happy to do so, Madam Chair.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just wanted to raise something about our agenda for next week. I have a motion on notice dealing with immigration and the Ukraine conflict, and we also have signaled that we're going to be putting on notice soon a production of papers motion related to this study. I don't like to move those motions when we have witnesses. I think it's better if we have time set aside for them. I see that the agendas have already put out for the 2 meetings next week. So I wonder if is your intention to set aside some time for consideration of those motions? Because if not, then then we're going to be in a situation of needing to consider moving them when witnesses are present, which isn't ideal.
But I will have a discussion with the clerk and see what has been scheduled and how many witnesses, and then based on that discussion, I will inform you, inform all the members what we can do. If the will of the committee is that we need to set aside some time for the committee business, then we can do that. I'll have a discussion with the clerk, and then we can look into different options we can have. And based on that discussion, I will inform all the members.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. With this, our panel for today comes to an end, and I would take this opportunity to thank Ms. Xavier, Ms. Gill, and Ms. Boyce-Clare for appearing before the committee and providing important information, and thanks for all the work which you do on behalf of all Canadians. If the requests which have been made in regards to the information or the data, if you can submit that to the clerk of the committee, that will be very helpful. One just last thing, I just want to bring it to the attention of all the members. The draft report for the if I can ask the members to avoid the discussions, I'm just trying to end the meeting, so if I can have the attention of all the members. The draft report for the acceptance rates of the international students will be circulated by 3 p.m. today to all the members. So, thanks to the work of the analyst for preparing that draft report, and looking forward to get through that draft report. So, is the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Yes. Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.